Hello and welcome to this segment of Arts Talk. I'm Sherri Burr and my guest for this segment is author Paula Paul. Welcome, Paula.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's so great to have you here. And let's just talk about your background. You started out as a journalist, born in Texas. You've worked for newspapers, is it, and magazines in Texas and New Mexico.
That's right.
And then you decided to become an author. What made you decide to switch from journalism to writing novels?
It wasn't a decision to switch.
Oh.
I always knew that I wanted to do both.
Okay.
So I had this idea since childhood that I would be a journalist first and then a novelist. And I actually started writing novels while I was still working as a journalist.
You know, since childhood, is it because you read a lot of books?
I think so. I think so. I don't know. I can't remember when I decided to be a writer, since I loved books and loved to read.
What were some of your favorites?
Some of my favorites.
Yeah, your favorite authors, favorite novels?
Of course, when I was a teenager, one of my favorites was Nancy Drew, but Carolyn King, who is about, what, 50 or 60, maybe 100 different people.
Right.
And Treasure Island. I remember loving Treasure Island as a child. And I remember reading the story of the book Gone with the Wind when I was young. Oh, I don't know. Any book that I was reading was my favorite book.
At the time.
Yeah.
At the time.
Still is.
And you've written a series, the Dr. Alexander Gladstone Mystery Series.
Yes.
And it's historical.
That's right.
Novels. Let's just talk about what made you decide to write historical fiction.
I've always liked historical fiction. I've always liked history. Almost any aspect of history, ancient history, recent history, World War II history, I don't know, I think the reason I like it is because it's a good way to see how the past has shaped us and how we can learn from the past. I think that's part of the reason. But really, the story of how I came to write these is not very esoteric. I got a phone call from an editor. Actually, my agent got the call, and then he called me, and he said, "We are looking for a mystery series, a historical mystery series, and we'd like you to write it." And I said, "Oh, I'd love to do that." And he said, "You can set it anywhere you want, except the American West."
Okay.
The reason for that was because at that time, it's still a problem. The American West has been overdone, and we're just not. They're not doing the American West anymore. So I thought about it, and of course he was in New York, and all the editors were in New York, and I thought, I don't want to write about the East Coast because they'll know more than I do about the East Coast.
Right.
So I just thought, I've read a lot of Victorian novels, so I'm going to do Victorian England. And I just decided to do that. It required quite a bit of research, and I don't know that it was a wise decision, except that I do enjoy writing about that era. And the research was so interesting, especially from a female point of view, and from a woman's rights point of view, because women, of course, in the Victorian era, anywhere, England or the U.S. or anywhere, were not given a lot of rights. In fact, women in the U.S. weren't allowed to vote until the 1920s, and so and the fact that I decided to have my heroine be a physician. I did a lot of research into that and found that they were discriminated against, and in fact could not become a physician. In England at that time, there were two distinct categories for doctors. One was surgeon, which was not a surgeon as we think of it today, but just sort of a general practice doctor, and the other was physician. And a woman was not allowed to become a physician.
But she could become a surgeon.
She could become a surgeon, which didn't mean she necessarily performed surgery. The reason she couldn't become a physician was because it required women to work with dead bodies, and they thought that was indecent for a woman to work with male bodies. So she could not become, she couldn't even attend she couldn't even go into the labs or anything like that. She could attend lectures, but she could not go into labs or anything like that. So she had a lesser degree.
Okay. So then you chose to name your character Dr. Alexander Gladstone, and you then put her in a role where she is solving mysteries of dead people. So how do you get around this physician surgeon?
Well, I did it this way. I had her be the daughter of a physician. And in a small town in England, I just made the town up. It's called Newton-upon-Sea.
Okay.
And her father had been the physician there, and he had taught her along. So he had taught her all of the things that she was forbidden to know from a
book or schooling.
Right.
Yeah.
From a
schooling standpoint. Okay.
Yeah. So that's how she can do all these things.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're very clever also in your writing, talking about people's prejudices against female doctors, or even against any doctor that's not their regular doctor.
Yes. Yeah.
And you get around that by having her be kind of, in a clever way, kind of hint that she knows what's wrong with the person, and then the person will be open to having Dr. Alexandra Gladstone treat them.
Well, we kind of learn that as women, don't we? Don't we kind of learn how to get around some stumbling blocks sometime? So that was pretty, even in today's world. So and certainly when I was starting out in the newspaper business, that was a long time ago, in the 60s, as a matter of fact, and there were more limits as to what women could do, and women were not paid as much then, because it was assumed that we would have children and not be productive workers. So we learned how to get around some stumbling blocks, I guess is a prudent way to say it.
Okay.
And how to do it without without creating a war, I guess. So that came natural for me. I had come up learning how to do that, how to get around certain stumbling blocks from being a woman.
And as part of your research, did you spend time in England?
Actually, I've been to England several times, but I didn't think, well, I guess everything I do I think of as research.
Okay.
But I wasn't really planning to write these books the first time I went. Since I began to write these books, I've been back 2 or 3 times, and of course I'm very observant of what it looks like and what the streets look like, and how I can create this small town that I invented, and what it would look like, because in England everything is older than it is here. So I wanted to get that feel of what a very ancient small town would look like. So I went to a lot of small towns and kind of quietly observed the people and that sort of thing. So in that sense, yes, I did do research.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the things that impresses me about your writing is the dialogue, and how you've been able to capture a way of speaking that's very Victorian England.
Well, you know, I think that's because I grew up with my grandmother, and my grandmother was not from England. I mean, her ancestors, or her grandparents were, but from the UK at least. And she didn't have a British accent, but she had, the way that she formed her words and the way that she expressed herself was very Victorian. Oh. So I think that's where I picked up that ear for Victorian speech. Yeah.
And one of the things else that I think you do very well in your novels is capturing social class interaction. And so what kind of research enabled you to do that?
I think the most research I did for that was just growing up reading novels set in well, you know, Jane Eyre,
okay.
you know, and any British novel, you get this sense of class, and you come to understand the difference. And Americans are so interested in that because we don't, supposedly, we don't have a class system.
Right.
At least it's not as rigid
Right.
as it was in
Right.
England. And so because I had read so much, I didn't really have to do a lot of in-depth research when I started writing those books because I had absorbed it through the years by reading all the things that young girls of my era read, all of those Victorian novels and all of the, you know, Pride and Prejudice and oh, I just absorbed those. I just loved them when I was a teenager.
Wow.
Now everybody reads Harry Potter, but that was what I was reading.
Okay. No Sense and Sensibility for the
Oh
younger
yeah,
crowd. Yeah.
No, I don't think so. At least my my granddaughters. I have two granddaughters who are in their teens, and they don't read that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes for a different conversation, right? Do you sometimes read the modern young adult
Oh yes,
books?
I do,
Okay.
because I have now written one young adult. So I've read a lot, and I did that. I wouldn't have done it except that my agent asked me to. She said, "Why don't you try a young adult?" So I did, and I wrote. And she said, "It would be good if you made it a young adult fantasy." So I did, sort of. I invented a sister for Merlin, and it made them both teenagers. And then he accidentally transports her to 21st century America. So she's a 15-year-old sister of Merlin who comes to an American city and has to learn to speak American slang, and she also has to fight a certain amount of prejudice when she's here, because she is the reason he sends her out of the time and out of the country is because she is a wizard. And I invented this situation where she's not allowed to be a wizard because she's female, and she has to be a witch. But and when one is a witch in my story, one has a certain kind of wand, and a wizard has a different kind of wand. But she can't make the witch wand work. She has to use the wizard wand. So she's looked down upon, and she is reviled because she's acting in a way that a female shouldn't act. So she gets transported here, and she encounters a young man who is gay and is bullied, and his life is threatened because so that's how I tied it together. I tied this imaginary made-up prejudice, which is absolutely ridiculous, and brought her here so that she sees this other kind of prejudice equally as ridiculous as someone who can't use one kind of wand. She has to use the other kind of wand, and therefore she is frowned upon, looked down upon, vilified, life is threatened, and all of that stuff. So that's the parallel. And I don't spell that out for my readers. I let them draw that own conclusion, hoping that they will see how ridiculous that kind of prejudice is, or any kind of prejudice for that matter.
Wow. In your stories, do the characters kind of take on a life of their own?
They do. I like to write character-driven novels more than plot-driven novels. Of course, when one's writing mysteries, you have to have a pretty established and defined plot. But I like the character-driven novels, and so yes, my characters do. In fact, I remember one of the reviews I got early on for one of those was that it was not a very positive review, and it said, ignore the plot and concentrate on the characters because the plot is weak. Well, the plot's not weak. But the characters are strong.
Well, that must be one of the hardest things as a writer, is dealing with the reviews, right?
Yes,
and especially now in our digital world with all the bloggers, you know, the bloggers who are out there reviewing books. So it must be hard, though.
Well, a little, but knock on wood, so far most of my reviews have been positive. So, but you know, you just have to accept that some people aren't going to like what you write.
Right.
And move on from there. It's like learning to deal with rejections.
Yes.
When you're a writer, you just have to.
Yes,
you have to be a little bit tough.
Right. All writers have rejection stories. I know Janet Ivanovich said when she finally sold a novel, it took her 10 years. She had a bonfire and she burned 10 years worth of rejections letters.
Yeah.
And some have, you know, particular mean rejections. I don't know if you've had any that were particularly personal.
Oh, yes, I have. I certainly have, yeah, that they are very unkind.
The unkindness of others, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a challenge.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about Crazy Quilt, because this is different from the Alexander Gladstone novels.
This is more of a literary novel, much harder to sell.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh.
Literary fiction?
Yes.
And this is based on a character who is experiencing breast cancer.
Yes.
Yes, and so tell us about your decision to decide to do that kind of story.
Well, because I had breast cancer. And it was a very frightening experience for me because I had a serious type of breast cancer, and in fact was told by 3 different doctors that I wasn't going to make it.
Wow.
So
how long ago was this?
Oh, that was a long time ago. It was 18 years, so I did make it.
18 years ago.
Yes.
Oh, wow. And did they tell you to get your affairs in order, get a will?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that is in itself is frightening. I mean, it's frightening to be told you have it's frightening to be told you have cancer.
Right.
And then to have them say you're not going to make it. And I didn't want to believe that. And so I wrote about this book is about overcoming fear as much as overcoming cancer.
Okay.
So yeah, and it's this is one of my more literary successful books, not necessarily, I don't know who the camera is, not necessarily monetarily successful, but it was more, it was acclaimed by reviewers and that sort of thing. And I donate 1/3 of my royalties of this book to breast cancer research.
Okay, Crazy Quilt.
Yeah, and I to UNM, the UNM Cancer Research.
Oh, to the UNM Cancer Center.
Yes.
Oh,
yes,
great.
I do. Yeah,
great.
Because it's just a cause that's very close to my heart.
Okay.
And I personally think this is one of my better books, if not my best book.
Ah, okay.
It's really different from mysteries, and it's not. You read it for a different reason. You read those kind of things more for escape and prison. And this is this one is a more literary novel that you read for I don't know, more insight into life. I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Insights into life versus escape.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I like both when I'm
reading.
When I'm reading. Yeah, I think everybody does. I think I mean, you know, most intelligent people like to read for both reasons, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
And to what extent have you become part of the digital world? Are your books available on Amazon?
Yes,
as
they
e-books?
are. And this is just a new thing for me.